r/nosleep. Posted BYU GooseSomething. I think my best friend is dead, and nobody believes me. I met Jess, my best friend, a few years ago. I left high school and started sixth form college in late 2017, when I was 16. In case you're wondering, I'm from the UK, where we have college, aka sixth form, after high school but before university. I had been looking forward to leaving all of the cliques and drama of high school behind, and I was excited for what I'd been told was going to be the best time of my life. Turns out, college is just as cliquey and bitchy as high school but with more sex and booze. Now, being the awkward nerdy mess that I am, I managed to keep out of all the fallouts and feuds, and managed to escape most of the bitching. I didn't make a lot of friends, but I did make one in particular who would go on to be my best friend for almost all of my 2 years at college. Her name is Jess. Or was Jess. I'm not sure which to say anymore. We met on the bus that took us to and from college every day, and we hit it off almost immediately. We both shared a common dislike of the particularly annoying and cliquey group of fellow students who shared our small bus. I know I probably sound like a bit of a boring old git at this point, but if you had to spend every bus journey listening to how Sarah shagged Josh or how ugly Shannon looked on Saturday, you'd understand. Me and Jess just seemed to click. Maybe we were boring old gits together. Over time we became pretty fast friends. We began spending more time together in college, not just on the bus. Then outside college. She became the first real friend I had. My best friend. Anyway, Jess lived with her mom and her brother, and I got to know both of them pretty well from all the times I went to her house. Her mom was called Claire. She was lovely, smiley, and always seemed to be happy and ready with a joke for any occasion. Jess' brother Luke was less so, but he was alright and he could be a laugh. He was 25, and he'd been in the army. I never really asked about her dad. All I knew was that he left when Jess was very little. One day Jess and I got off the bus together to go hang out at her house, as we'd done countless times before. This was in April of 2019, near the end of our second and last year of college. We went inside, and I saw Jess' mom sat on the sofa in the living room. She was sitting with her back to us and didn't turn to face us when we entered. That was the point where I started to feel like something was wrong. Just a nagging doubt at first. We greeted her as usual, but she didn't reply. Now I knew something was wrong. I could feel it in my belly like a black weight. I called out to her again, and started to move closer. Now, Claire had always had a somewhat rosy complexion. If she was slightly rounder she'd have perfectly fitted my stereotypical view of a jolly, portly, red-faced old lady, with a pint mug in her hand and a broad grin on her face. The classic nanny og. Not now. I saw her face. It was white. I don't mean white as in her race, I mean she was as pale as a sheet of paper. Her skin had an almost flaky look to it like old paint. She was shaking too, and her hand was clutching something small on a chain. I didn't see what it was, and I didn't really get time to look in detail. Claire chose that moment to finally turn around and acknowledge us, making me jump out of my skin in the process. I could see Jess was scared now too. But Claire insisted she was just feeling ill and told us to go out so she could get some sleep. We reluctantly agreed, but something still felt very badly wrong. I should have listened to the feeling in the pit of my stomach. I was nearly out of the house when I heard a sound from upstairs. I remember the sound distinctly, probably because I was so scared myself. It was 3 consecutive thuds, no more than a quarter of a second apart. I remember thinking I was overreacting at the time, that I was scared for no reason. I reasoned it must have been Luke moving around upstairs, which actually went some way to dispelling some of my fears. Luke could look after Claire if she was ill, and I told myself everything was fine. We went to the arcade and tried to forget the worry that was clearly hanging over us. After a few rounds of air hockey we managed to at least pretend everything was fine, and eventually we both went home. I never saw Jess after that. Nobody did. Not really, anyway. There were police investigations and search parties combing the local area for months, but we never found out where she went. There were a few different theories ranging from her running away and starting a new life somewhere to kidnapping, but they never found any proof of anything. Claire, heartbroken, went to stay with her parents, just grandparents, in the South. The whole thing was so surreal to me, it took a while to sink in. When it finally did, I threw up a couple of times. I kept remembering the fear I'd been sure I saw in her, and for a while it was all I could think of. That look in her eye. Worse than that was when I spoke to Luke during the investigation, and he told me he'd been staying at a friend's house the night Jess disappeared. He wasn't home at all that night. I threw up again after that. Of course I joined in with the searches. I'd go out every night searching the local forests and woods, at every step expecting to see her lifeless corpse in the undergrowth. Luke came with me. I guess he blamed himself for Jess' disappearance since he was away at the time. I told him to see a therapist, but he wouldn't listen. One night, as I have many nights before, I went back to Jess' old place. I've never been a religious person. I guess I've always thought it was silly. What I saw that night made me change my mind. The door was open just a crack when I arrived. I could hear the sound of people talking inside, but I couldn't make out words. I pushed the door open. In hindsight, maybe I should have knocked, but please understand, something felt wrong that night. Something wasn't right. It wasn't the time for good manners. Claire and Luke were there in the living room, both sat down facing away from me. And Jess. She was stood right there, in front of me. But it wasn't her. I don't know how to explain it. If you'd been there you'd understand. She was white as paper and quivering, just like Claire had been that night, but Jess was even worse. Her skin was peeling and her hair had clumps missing, and her eyes. They were the worst part of all. They were lifeless. Jess' spark was gone, replaced by these dull unmoving orbs. They didn't even move in their sockets to look at me. She wore Jess trainers, Jess clothes, even Jess scarf. I suppose the only thing out of place was the little charm around its neck. It was red and jagged like a shard of glass, and it stood out like a beacon contrasting with her paper-white skin. Then I heard a voice which I didn't recognize, coming from the old sofa in the corner of the room. "Excuse me," it said. "I think it's polite to knock." It's as if it's burned into my memory. I can't forget the self-righteous arrogance dripping from his words, and I can't forget the man who said them. The only word I can come up with to describe the features of the man who now lounged in the corner sofa is pointy. I know that's not particularly descriptive, but it's the best I can do. His cheeks, his jaw, even his ears. They just didn't seem right. He was just pointy. He was tall and slender, almost wispy, and he was wearing a suit and jacket. He lounged there, like he owned the place, completely at his ease. I ran. Perhaps not the best response, but I'm not ashamed. I ran away, and something deep inside tells me I did the right thing. I told my mom and dad what I saw that night. I told my teachers. I told the police. Then I told my therapists. Now, I'm told it was a psychotic episode. Apparently none of it happened. I was committed to a mental hospital when I should have been starting university. The doctors say I'm sick. They think I can't tell what's real and what's not. I guess that just shows what they know. I know I'm right, something happened to Jess, and Claire, and Luke. I know the truth. When I saw her, she was already dead. They just won't believe me. The thing is, a new doctor started here a few days ago. The only way I can describe him is pointy. His cheeks, his jaw, even his ears. Maybe, when they find my body, they'll finally believe me.